Hey guys, Michelle from Michelle's Craft Corner here, and in today's video we're going to be stamping on candles. This is a simple and easy technique that makes an awesome gift with your favorite stamp set. Let's get started. So here is a close-up of that candle we're going to be making today. I think it turned out really pretty. And this was made using the new Painted Harvest stamp set, which is available as a bundle with this awesome punch. We're not using the punch today, but it does exist as part of that bundle. Here's another candle example as well, the little washi tape detail. So you can see there's a lot of versatility with this technique. You can just pick any stamp set that you like, but I really been in love with the Painted Harvest right now, so that is the one we're going to be using. Then for ink colors, I used a couple different ones. For the yellows, I used the So Saffron and the Crushed Curry. For the leaves, did the Pear Pizzazz and the Old Olive. And then for the words, I used the Early Espresso and Crumb Cake for the center of our sunflowers. The other thing you're going to need for this technique, actually there's two more things, and that is some wax paper. Now the brand doesn't matter, just any wax paper that's got that nice waxy sides. And you're not going to need a strip bigger than your candle, so you don't need a ton of it, just enough for the candle, and I'll show you how we're using that in a minute. We're also going to be using a piece of tissue paper. So just some standard tissue paper you can get at the dollar store or recycled from a recent gift. Similar to the wax paper, you don't need a ton of it, and it does stamp easier if it's not wrinkled. You can if it has a few, but it'll stamp easier if it's nice and flat. Last thing you're going to need for this technique is our Stampin' Up! Heat tool. This is a really awesome tool for embossing and doing some things like that, but for this particular candle, I really recommend using this one. People may ask, well, can you use a hairdryer? Well, you might, depending on your hairdryer, but I wouldn't recommend a hairdryer because it's harder to control the heat, whereas this, you can really control it and know what you're doing. So these are the things we're going to be using today. So we're going to start off with our piece of tissue paper. I know it may be a little hard to see. Oh, and one other thing we're going to be using is the silicone craft sheet. And I'll show why in a minute, so we'll stick that off to the side. So let's go ahead and start with our stamping. Now we're going to be cutting out these pieces individually after we stamp them. So you don't really need to worry about the alignment or if they're, right next to each other, that kind of thing. So I'm going to start with my flower base. Now I really like the lightest shade to be on the bottom of my sunflower and the darker shade to be the more detail. But I mean, really, you can use any of your ink colors that you like. So we're just going to go ahead and ink that one up. Now, do keep in mind, tissue paper is very thin, so be sure to have something underneath it because your ink will seep through and it will get on whatever is underneath. So grid paper is particularly awesome for this one. So we're just going to go ahead and stamp that. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention, oh, where is it? Is using the Pierce mat does help. There it is. Now because the tissue paper, as I said, seeps through, it's best to tuck that underneath the grid paper. There we go. Alright, so back to where we were. I'm going to do another one here. And just depending on how much ink you get on your stamp will depend on how full that looks. But do keep in mind it is tissue paper, so it will tear, so you got to be kind of gentle with it. Now we're going to add our crushed curry on top with the detailed stamp set. And for this one, it's easier to line up if you line up the centers. But the good thing about this particular stamp set is it's kind of an artsy stamp set, so even if you don't stamp it perfectly, you know, it's kind of got that fun artsy look, so you'll be okay. Just line that up. Okay, just like that, which, yeah, I think you can see that okay in the camera. All right, and then for our centers, I like to use the crumb cake for the center. I think it just looks really good with this shade of yellow. So we'll go ahead and pop that out here. Now this is a particularly juicy, fresh ink pad, so I'm going to stamp it off. So meaning I'm going to stamp it on paper and then stamp it in the center so it's just not quite so dark. There we go. Alright, so then we have some of our basic sunflowers to decorate that candle. And we're going to go ahead and also stamp our leaves. For that, we're using, yet again, the Old Olive and Pear Pizzazz. Oh, there they are. Okay. Okay. So, yet again, lighter shade on the bottom. So, I'm going to do the Pear Pizzazz on the bottom. Just a little light tap, but I think I'm going to stamp that one off too. There we go. So it's a really nice light shade of green. Stamp off. Okay. And then I'm going to do the Old Olive for on top. And just line it right up and stamp right on top of the other. Just like that. Off the edge there. Okay, so you guys get the idea. That's how I stamped my pieces. Move these off to the side here. You're going to do the same thing with the sentiment. And then you're going to cut around your pieces. Now, you can really do as many as you want, as you have space for on your candle. Now, the candle I'm stamping on today is just a cheap dollar store pillar candle in white. Really, any candle will work. There's not really you have to use a specific type of candle for this. So just about any you might have in your closet or wherever. The one thing I will say though is for this tutorial I'm using white tissue paper on a white candle. If you have a different colored candle or a colored tissue paper, you might be seeing the edge of that tissue paper when we heat it in a second. So it is best to have matching candle and tissue paper so that you won't be able to see the lines. And you'll see what I mean in a second. Okay, so moving that off to the side here. We're done with our pierce mat. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and grab our candle. And I like to start with whatever piece I want to be centered. So for this one, I started with that center sentiment and then added the pieces on the sides. So for this one, we're going to start with the words and then add on the sunflowers and leaves. Okay, I know it's a circular candle, so that's going to want to roll. Okay, other thing is we're going to grab a piece of our wax paper. Yet again, it does not need to be a particularly big piece. Okay. You don't really need one bigger than your candle. This is probably bigger than I need. Just down a little. There we go. Alright, so we're going to start with our sentiment. Stick it right in the center where I want it. And then I'm going to take my piece of wax paper and lay it right over the top. And I'm going to pull it, kind of pull the edges so that it's nice and flat against that candle. Just like that, kind of making sure I got it where I want it. Then we're going to take our heat tool and stick it to the 1. You don't really need it at 2. 2 is going to be a little too hot, so just 1 is good enough as far as the heat. And we're going to take it and heat up the candle, and what's going to happen is as we heat it up, that candle wax is going to melt and it's going to seep into the tissue paper, and the 2 are going to become 1. Also, the wax paper, some of that wax will transfer as well. The other thing I want to be sure to have handy when I do this, now if you don't have the silicone craft mat, you can use paper. I just prefer using this. I think it's easier. And we'll use that in a second. So let's go ahead and heat this up. I'm just going to kind of heat it up, and you'll see it kind of bead and get wet looking. I don't know if that's going to show up in the camera. Do mind your fingers with it, though. It does get hot, so you'll watch your fingers. You can kind of see the edge will just disappear into the candle. You can kind of see that, like the edge disappeared. Alright, I'm going to turn it off. Then I'm going to take my craft mat and I'm just going to kind of give it a quick roll. Now, I like to give it a roll because it flattens out that wax that's melted, and sometimes depending on your candle you might have some little bumps or edges, especially if you put too much heat in one spot, it might drip. So doing that roll just helps smooth it out. So it dries pretty fast, and it's dry to the touch. And then we're going to peel our wax paper off. You can see, let me zoom in here. Go. Yeah, you can see, you really can't see that line, that edge, so it just blended in. Now if you do come across or you have like little spots, you can go back and heat it a little more doing the same technique. And we're going to do the exact same thing with the sunflower. So I'm going to take one of those sunflowers and I just fussy cut around the side. Now you don't have to get in all little leaves or anything like that. It's very forgiving. But the closer you are to the edge, the easier it'll be. You won't have as much to have to heat and melt together. All right, so we're going to do another sunflower. And you can see I added one already just for the sake of time. Now another thing, if you want your sunflower to look like, oh, sorry, zoom back out, there we go, to look like it's hanging off the edge, all you'll do is take your paper snips and you're just going to cut straight line across it. Okay, that's fairly straight. All right, and you're going to line it up right on the edge. Just like that, to give it the illusion that it's popping off. Let me scoot over just a little bit. You can see it's just going to be just like that. So we're going to take our wax paper again, lay it on, make sure it's even where we want it. Oh, it moved on me, hold on. Okay. Okay, so nice and taut. It's handy if you have the tissue paper long enough so you can have your fingers out of the way just around the corner. And so yet again, that heat tool, and heat it up. You just got to be sure to get those edges. Right. Give it a quick little roll. I'm just going to peel it right off, just like that. Oh, and look there. I don't know if you can see. That little spot right there did not go all the way down, so I'm just going to cover it again real quick. same thing. Keep that one spot. Go. Little rock. Sorry if I'm shaking the camera. Peel it off. So there we go. So that's the basic idea for this. And you do the same thing with the leaves, adding the leaves, oh, in the camera, okay, adding the leaves and covering and heat embossing. Now a couple questions that you guys might have about this is, can you use markers on the tissue paper? Yes, you can. You just need to be extra careful because it is tissue paper, and if it gets oversaturated, it will tend to rip. So you can, you just got to be really careful. Stamps are a little bit more forgiving when it comes to this. Other things, some people might be concerned, it's tissue paper, you're heating it, there's flame, concerns about fire and that kind of thing. As long as your wick, the center of your candle is straight, then you should not have any problems. But yet again, anytime you're dealing with flame or heat, do be careful. Not saying it can never happen, but just be responsible. The other thing might have a question on is, can you stamp on the battery operated candles? Now a lot of those have an outer waxy sheen. Yes, you can. It just depends on how thick the wax is on them. So every one will be a little different, but provided it has a thin layer of wax on the outside, you should be able to do this technique. But it just will depend on the candle, because all you're doing is melting that wax into the tissue paper. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this Stamping on Candles tutorial and have fun making lots of awesome stamped candle gifts. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.